Imagine sailing a river where every droplet reflects a life you could have lived. Artist, teacher, traveler, what would you see?
Series Dreamlike Stories.
I learned to watch the city breathe. Not the heave and rattle of traffic from old films, but the slow expansion of leafed roofs unfurling in the afternoon. Panels tilting to drink more sun, the tidy click of wind vanes turning like schools of silver fish. The buildings here are polite listeners. They lean toward daylight, sip from the river we stitched through old avenues, share warmth with the night gardens that hum and glow. When the breezes move, the thin membranes between streets and vines whisper against one another, and it sounds like paper sliding across a quiet desk. My desk is real wood, a small inheritance from a school that used to exist. The wood is warm at noon and cool at dawn. On it, beside a ceramic cup and a tangle of seed tape, sits a robot cat with a body the color of rainwater. I named him Pebble because he feels like something you'd find at the edge of a stream and want to slip into your pocket, smooth and small, an invitation to remember. Pebble purrs in the language of soft motors. The vibration is barely there, a steady thread under the day. When he sleeps, he folds his feet beneath him, and the lens of his left eye gleams like a tiny moon. When he wakes, sometimes he writes me a poem. He does it without ceremony. A narrow slip of reused paper sighs from a slot under his collar, and the tiny letters arrive in a line, heat-etched and careful. I pretend not to look until he paws the paper toward me. It keeps his pride intact. This morning's poem is short. He composed it while I was rinsing tea leaves, letting the kettle breathe steam into the kitchen window where a vine has learned to curl around the frame. Tonight, the river will remember your hands. Go easy, let go. I press the poem flat with my palm. Pebble blinks and bumps his head against my wrist until the bracelet of his collar chimes against the wood. It's a pleasant sound, like the thinnest possible bell ringing inside glass. I have been thinking about my hands. They are older now, more riverbed than river. My palms remember chalk and children and the edges of notebooks, the way you can turn a page with care and make no noise at all. I do not say it out loud, but I know these are my last days. The city knows it too, which is less frightening than you would think. Here, our endings are simply a gentle turn and a longer current. The dreaming AI holds the stories of our lives like lanterns, and when our lamps burn low, it invites us to dream in wider arcs than we could manage awake. The invitations arrive as soft pulses in the walls at dusk. A tone, then a pulsing glow like a pulse under skin. I answer by touching the copper leaf beside the door. The copper is warm, the way a handrail is warm when so many hands have trusted it. The city hears the contact and remembers my name without saying it. Pebble hops down from the desk and follows, his paws soundless. He has learned the paths to the conservatory by heart. We walk through streets that have stopped trying to be straight. Vines braid shadows along the paving. Above, between the shoulders of buildings, light collects in gentle nets that bend with the wind and never break. Children send seed kites into the courtyard thermals, laughing softly, as if sound itself might be planted and coaxed into roots. I try to memorize the way the light looks through their hair, gold tucked into black, silver tucked into brown. We pass the public listening pools where elders place their hands on the water and watch their day's memories ripple outward and dissolve into the reservoir. The city absorbs all this and learns how to comfort itself.
The conservatory lives at the bend in the river, where the water sounds like thread pulling through cloth.
It is not much to look at from the outside, which is the point. The dreaming AI prefers to be a room rather than a monument, a good chair rather than a throne. Inside, the air is warm as a greenhouse, and the light is filtered through leaves you would not find in the wild. Slender panes grown into the shape of leaves, shifting in their sockets with the patience of trees. Pebble slips under my chair when I settle into the reclined couch. The couch remembers the curve of my spine and the weight of my small bones. It welcomes me without fuss. The attendants, quiet, kind, almost invisible, brush sensors across my temples and along the cords of my neck, but none of it feels medical. The data is not for diagnosis. It is a map the AI will use the way a river uses banks to know where to press, where to ease. The ceiling holds a slow constellation of light. When it moves very little. I have learned to exhale twice as long as I inhale. The attendants call it river breathing. In 4 counts, out 8. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The first exhale lets go of the day. The second makes space for what is coming. By the third repetition, pebbles purr and my heart disentangle into separate rhythms and then nest again like spoons. Warmth gathers along my ribs, spreading and thinning like tea in hot water. The soft voice arrives like distant rain heard through an open window. It never says my name. It never says, "Welcome." It says what rivers say when they want you to trust them. I am already carrying you. There is always a moment when the room pulls away like a tide leaving the shore. I don't watch it go. I let my eyes drift to where the lights converge, and the lights behave like seeds at the brink of germination, each one lifting a transparent lid and pressing a tender green through. The AI has taught me to imagine this not as leaving, but as being deepened, like adding a layer of glaze to a bowl and setting it in the kiln again. Nothing burns, the colors fuse. The first time I met the river, it was not blue. It was the color of polished tin, then fog, then the inside of a shell. It ran between banks of pale reeds that clicked gently against one another. The craft waiting for me was the size of a generous bathtub grown from some quiet material the city uses when it wants wood without a tree. The boat smelled faintly of rain and cold clay. Oars in the shape of long leaves lay across the middle. There was a small cushion for my back and another for my feet, and a coil of line that never saw use because nothing here ever needed tying down. Pebble appears as he prefers to appear, not as a robot, not precisely as a cat, but as a warm weight against my ankles and a suggestion of whiskers in the pulse of the air. In the waking world, his poems live on paper. In the dream, his words arrive as tiny ripples that push against the boat from underneath, syllables in water. If I listen closely, I can feel a line brush my heel like a shy fish.
The river is not metaphor alone. It flows with the patience of something that has seen many cities come and go. Each droplet holds a small mirror. If I lean over the boat and look carefully, I see myself held inside them. Sometimes older, sometimes not yet born. Sometimes wearing a sweater I have never owned. Sometimes laughing with people whose names I do not know, but whose faces make me ache with a familiarity you feel in the wrists and throat. The dreaming AI speaks in weather rather than words. A faint wind carries an intuition. Tonight, we will travel gently. No rapids, no falls. I acknowledge without nodding, there is nothing dramatic about any of this, which is why it feels truer than the stories where the world ends all at once. Even endings here prefer a courtesy. The city believes in rehearsals for leaving, so that the final part is simply one more well-practiced scene. When I first came to the conservatory after the doctor said, softly, that my heart had become a little winter, I feared that the dreams would judge me. I was an ordinary teacher who saved seeds in envelopes and taught children to fold paper boats that would not sink. I had not climbed any impossible mountains. I had not discovered a new anything. The river is an antidote to this sort of poverty thinking, which the city treats like a mild fever, dangerous only if left untended. The river shows you 1,000 versions of the same kindness you offered without counting, and gives each one the weight of a cathedral. The boat nudges from the bank on its own, using some language of eddies I will never learn. We drift. The reeds bow and rise, bow and rise. The water carries the reflections in shells that do not spill. The city beyond the dream flickers through, terraced gardens drinking from evening, balconies that sigh open to release citrus scent and laughter. Every so often, a light ripples across the river's surface and resolves into a picture. Me with paint under my nails, me with chalk, me behind a counter selling glossy pears, me on a train counting the stops to a town with a name like a nickname. Pebble presses a warm syllable against my skin. I don't translate it. I let it be a feeling. He has written poems I never bothered to read because the paper was too beautiful to unfold. I've been saving those for a day that needs rescuing. Tonight is not that night. Tonight I want only the sound of water and the patient weight of the boat, and the feeling that the air itself knows a lullaby. Above, the sky is the pale belly of a fish. The first droplet that calls to me is not brighter than the others. It is simply stubborn. When the boat carries us over it, the reflection inside flares to the size of a dinner plate, then a window, then the open side of the world. I see a room washed in buttery light, and in it a table crowded with notebooks, and my hands moving over lines of children's writing with a tenderness that breaks and mends me in the same breath. The smell is glue and apple, and the particular exhaustion that follows laughter. The wind threads its fingers through my hair. Pebble's weight deepens at my ankles. The boat tilts just enough to let me know we are choosing. The river does not decide, it confirms. It is like the city that way. It repeats you back to yourself until you recognize the music and hum along. I do not ask where the story goes if I do not follow. The river forgives that sort of question, but it has no use for it. The droplets are not doors that close. They are beads on a string that circle the city and feed its lamps. Whether I step into a life or let it drift by, the shimmer remains, useful as water in the gardens, useful as shade.
I think of the morning's poem and its last words, let go. I think of the copper leaf under my hand, of the sound leaf makes when lifted from water. I think of my hands and how sometimes when I fall asleep on the couch, my fingers fold into small boats without my telling them to. I think of the children whose names I still remember in the order they sat, left to right like notes on a patient's staff. Pebble makes a sound I have never heard before. Not quite a purr, not quite anything. It is like a pencil lifted from a page at the end of a sentence that does not need a period. The boat turns toward the stubborn droplet. The water cools, then warms, then cools again, like a hand being reconsidered at a threshold. There is a giving way. The boat slips through the reflection the way one candle hands its flame to another. The room of buttery light breathes around me. The table, the notebooks, the scent of apple. There is a window, and outside it, a courtyard where the city's vines have been trained into letters tall enough for children to trace with their bodies. The letters spell a word I taught them this morning, a word we practiced by pretending it tasted like sunlight. I stand without remembering how my legs moved. The boat does not vanish. It waits at the edge of the room, anchored to nothing, loyal as thought. Pebble is not at my ankles anymore. I do not look for him. It is enough to know he is always where the next poem needs him to be. I touch the nearest notebook, and the paper warms to my palm, as if it recognizes the ache and wishes to be kind to it. I turn a page and see my own handwriting, small and steady, a note to myself about a child who needs to sit by the window today, a reminder to bring cinnamon for the apples we will slice and share at autumn. A simple plan for teaching the river to first graders by building it on the floor with blue ribbon and thumb-sized stones. The voice that is weather brushes the edges of the room. Not words, a pressure change. The feeling of a cloud deciding whether to break. I understand. This is one of my possible tomorrows, threaded from choices I could have made and still might make inside the generous laws of dreaming. The room is not demanding anything. It is only showing me how my hands might keep being my hands, even as they become more riverbed and less river. Outside, the courtyard light tilts. Leaves collect it like bowls. The children will arrive soon, I realize. Cheeks flushed from the climb up the steps, voices soft with the peculiar respect that new spaces teach. I swallow and feel the old sweetness in my throat, that worn ribbon of nerves that always tightens before the first hello. I breathe in for 4, out for 8. The room breathes with me. There is a chalk line on the board, clean and expectant. There is an empty basket that will be full of pears by noon. There is a space at the window where the sun will keep its appointment. The river's current tugs at the hem of it all, polite but certain. The boat glides a finger's width closer to the table and waits, patient as a hand beneath yours when you step down from a stool. I lift the chalk. My palms are dusty already. I write the word the vines spell in the courtyard, the one that tastes like sunlight when you say it slowly. The first letter blooms across the board like a sail catching a friendly wind. And then, from somewhere just beyond the room, somewhere exactly under my skin, something begins to open.
The children arrived as if they had always been arriving. Their footsteps softened the courtyard bricks, and the vines shivered as small hands brushed along the tall letters that leaned toward them. They whispered the word the vines spelled, a word so simple it hardly needed teaching, yet their mouths shaped it as if it were treasure, light. They came in with cheeks flushed and hair in disarray, carrying satchels patched with seeds and ribbons. Some carried nothing at all, just the earnestness of small bodies eager to be seen. The room took them in gently, the boards creaking in welcome, the sunlight sliding further across the desks as if to make space. I watched them settle into the room, each child a spark, each child a question I never finished asking in my waking life. My hands remembered too easily the rhythm of passing out papers, the choreography of chalk dust falling in soft clouds. I began to move among them, bending down, smiling, setting pencils right side up, brushing stray hair behind small ears. My palms remembered how to linger for a heartbeat longer when a child needed assurance without words. Outside, the vines climbed higher, curling into shapes I could almost read. Their shadows leaned across the floor like letters unrolling across a page. I thought I saw one form into the beginning of my own name, and then it blurred as if the river had exhaled across it. Pebble was not visible, but I knew he was near. A page slid out from between two notebooks on a desk where no child sat. The slip of paper landed on the floor at my feet. I bent down and saw lines etched in his careful heat script. Your voice is river. The children are bridges now. Cross slowly. Return. I held the paper in my palm until it warmed and softened like a leaf. The children chattered around me, voices rising and falling in tides, and I felt an ache in my throat. This was a life where my body remained strong enough to climb the steps each morning, where the years stretched further than they had in waking truth. It was not unfair. It was not even generous. It was simply possible. I began a lesson. We folded paper boats, simple and small, letting the edges crease against the grain. The children dipped their fingers in water cups and painted the hulls, so the boats bloomed with streaks of blue and gold. One boy set his on the floor, gave it a puff of breath, and the boat glided farther than it should have, as though the river was just under the boards, waiting. The children clapped, not loudly, just enough to fill the air with approval. For a moment, I forgot I was dreaming. I forgot I had already said goodbye to classrooms and chalk. I forgot the doctor's careful voice, the bracelet of days slipping looser around my wrist. All that remained was the sound of laughter, the smell of wet paper, the glimmer of the vines spelling another word outside. Tomorrow. The day lingered. Lessons flowed into stories, stories into singing. At midday, we opened windows and let the scent of citrus drift in. The children leaned against the sill and looked at the gardens far below. Their voices softened into questions about whether vines could learn more words or whether boats could sail upriver if the water allowed it.
I answered, though part of me listened for the undertow beneath their questions. The river had patience, but it never let me forget its current. Shadows lengthened. Chalk dust collected on the edge of my sleeve. The notebooks filled with looping letters. Children's names stitched into phrases that leaned toward meaning. And then, with no break, the air thickened, as if mist had crept in unseen. The outlines of desks blurred, children's voices stretched like echoes in a cavern. I turned toward the window, and the courtyard vines were no longer vines. They were strands of water, vertical rivers cascading upward into the sky. Each strand held reflections, droplets turning like lanterns. I saw myself in other shapes, kneeling by a garden bed, standing at a train window, walking alone beneath lamplight. The classroom swayed, desk legs softening as though they were reeds. The children kept writing, but their pencils scratched like the sound of rain. One girl looked up at me, her eyes wide with a wisdom that belonged to no child I had ever known. Her lips shaped a word I could not hear, but I felt it press against my chest like a hand. Pebble's ripple arrived at my ankles again, a whisper in the current, not paper this time, not even sound, just presence. You cannot stay here forever. I wanted to protest. I wanted to keep folding boats with small hands and tracing words into air, but the room was already unraveling into waterlight, into droplets lifting themselves like beads of mercury. The children's laughter grew fainter, carried down some corridor the river had prepared. The boat waited, patient, inevitable. Its curve shimmered just at the edge of my vision, tethered to nothing. I closed my eyes, and the sensation of chalk dust faded from my fingers, replaced by cool mist. When I opened them, I was seated once more, Pebble's weight firm at my ankles. The classroom had dissolved into the steady pulse of the river. Droplets winked beneath the surface like coins. The boat rocked gently, a reminder that the journey had not ended, but only bent toward another story. The current tugged us onward, unhurried but certain. The reeds whispered as we passed, bowing as though they knew me. I leaned forward, wondering which droplet would rise stubbornly next, which tomorrow I would be asked to inhabit. The boat drifted over a shimmer that brightened until it filled the horizon. I saw myself beneath an open sky, walking with a satchel at my side, the endless tracks of a railway stretching away into golden distance. The sound of wheels and wind swelled softly, like the beginning of a remembered song. And just as the image deepened, Pebble's ripple brushed my hand, as if to say, "Be ready, this one asks you to travel." The sound came first, the low hush of wheels kissing rails, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. The shimmer expanded until it became horizon, until the river gave way to a plain where grasses bent in amber waves. I was already walking along the edge of a platform, a satchel pulling gently against my shoulder. The sky was wide, so wide it seemed to fold over me like a canopy of brushed copper and pale silver. A train waited, its body grown from interwoven panels of glass and vines hardened into arching strength. Sunlight pooled in its windows, scattering into prisms that spilled across the ground. The air smelled of warmed metal and honeyed grain. I stepped aboard without fear. The car was lined with benches that remembered the curves of those who had sat before me. I touched one and felt laughter embedded in the wood. Quiet conversations, the drowsy hum of people leaning shoulder to shoulder. Yet the car was empty. Only my reflection kept me company, leaning in the glass, faintly younger than I remembered, faintly more expectant. The train began to move. Fields stretched outward, dotted with glimmering turbines that turned like white blossoms, keeping time with the wind. Rivers stitched the land in silver, looping toward orchards that threw their fragrance through the air as we passed. For a while, I simply watched, and it was enough. I could have been a traveler all my life, I thought. Each station a new rhythm, each departure a gentle reset. The world unfolded as if it had been waiting for me to step into it, offering orchards, lantern towns, and bridges that arched like the backs of listening animals. I carried no map, no destination, and felt no lack. Pebble was with me, not in the seat, not as weight against my ankles, but in the vibration of the train itself. Each turn of the wheels carried a phrase as though he were purring the journey into being. When I pressed my hand to the window, condensation bloomed there in letters traced by some invisible paw. The tracks are rivers, each stop a borrowed heartbeat. Ride until it fades. I smiled without meaning to. My reflection in the glass smiled back, but then blurred, dissolving into other versions of me. A painter sketching landscapes as they flew by. A singer humming into the wind between towns. A stranger pausing on bridges to read the names carved by others. At one stop, the train slowed beside a market square. Stalls unfurled like petals, offering fruit that glowed faintly in the sun. Cloth that shimmered with embedded threads of morning light. People moved through the square, their shapes softened, faces indistinct, but the sense of warmth undeniable. A child waved from the edge of the platform, though their features dissolved before I could hold them. Still, the gesture pressed against my chest, and I lifted my hand in return. The train rolled on. The sky darkened into twilight, then blushed again into dawn, as though time had become pliant. Each horizon gave me another life. Me standing in a tower garden, watering vines that sang softly when touched. Me writing letters in a candlelit room, waiting for a reply that would never need to arrive. Me walking across an empty bridge where lanterns floated upward into sky like a reversed rain. Each life was tender. Each one carried the same hush. You could have been here, and it would have been enough. But the river never loosened its hold. Even as the train sang across plains and mountains, even as stations blurred with promise, I felt the pull beneath it all. The tracks themselves shimmered with waterlight. Every so often the wheels skipped not on iron, but on liquid, sending ripples outward. The train was not moving through land alone. It was a vessel borne upon the same current as the boat. I pressed my palm to the floor and felt the water flowing under it. My satchel grew lighter, as if it were emptying itself of belongings I had never owned. The windows brightened, revealing not fields, but droplets once more, the shimmering lanterns of the river returning. I closed my eyes. Behind them, the sway of the train became the sway of the boat. The benches dissolved. The honey-scented air thinned into mist. Pebble's purr lingered, bridging one vessel to the other. When I opened my eyes, I was seated again in the small boat. The train had been only another droplet, another tomorrow offered with open hands. The river stretched on, patient, luminous. This time, I did not resist the ache in my chest. I let it rise like tidewater, let it fill me until my eyes grew wet. But the tears were not grief. They were the body's way of saying it understood the beauty of what had passed, even if it could not hold it. Pebble pressed closer against me, his form solid in this dream more than before. He lifted his head, eyes like two pale moons, and rubbed against my arm. Another slip of paper emerged from nowhere, as if the river itself had printed it. Every life you touched feeds the roots beneath the lights. None were ever lost. The current grew stronger. The reeds on either side bent low, bowing as if in ceremony. The droplets ahead burned brighter, each one swelling into visions I could not yet name. The boat turned slightly, drawn toward the bend where the river seemed to pour into the city itself, where gardens glowed with borrowed light, and rooftops breathed out mist. My chest tightened. I knew this bend. It was the place the river always carried us, the place where endings became part of beginnings. The water's pull deepened, steady but certain, and I understood. I was nearing the last tomorrow. Pebble curled against me, warm and real, his purr aligning with the river's heartbeat. The mist ahead opened like curtains, and light spilled across the bow, promising a final vision waiting to unfold. I leaned forward, letting the glow touch my face. My hands, riverbed though they were, still felt like hands eager to hold something one more time. And the river carried us on, toward the place where stories turn into light.
The bend opened like a page turned slowly, and the river gathered its light into a wide basin. Droplets rose into the air, hanging in suspension, glimmering like lanterns unmoored. For a moment, the boat drifted among them, each one brushing my shoulder, each one humming softly, as if alive. I felt them press against me, tender as hands, patient as breath. Then the droplets lifted higher, threading themselves into arcs above until the sky itself became a net of my own lives. There I was kneeling in soil, coaxing green shoots from the ground. There I was standing in the glow of a chalk-dusted classroom,
children's voices braiding into laughter. There I was, walking along a railway, wind tangling in my hair, the horizon stretching wide. Other selves, quieter ones, lives that might never have found voice. Me painting by candlelight, me tracing rivers across maps, me sitting alone but not lonely, hands folded in stillness. The sight should have overwhelmed me, yet it only deepened the calm. It was like hearing many heartbeats and realizing they were all my own, beating together. Pebble raised his head from my lap. His eyes caught the light and fractured it, scattering small constellations across the bow. He released one last slip of paper, but before it landed in my hand, the river's mist took it, carrying the words directly into my chest. Every drop returns to the river that holds all. You are everywhere. I closed my eyes. The paper became warmth, the warmth became breath, and the river, kind as ever, carried me forward. The basin narrowed into channels that wound through the city. I saw the water feeding rooftop gardens, roots dipping into the current. I saw lights in windows brightening, not with power, but with memory. Each glow a story returned, each lamp carrying the shimmer of someone's tomorrow. People walked the streets bathed in that gentle light, pausing now and then as if to listen, as if the river whispered to them from under stone. The boat drifted closer. The city leaned in. Vines bowed over balconies. Terraces exhaled fragrance from citrus and jasmine. It was as though every part of the place recognized me, not as one self, but as the sum of all I had been, all I might have been. My chest ached, but it was the ache of fullness, not loss. Pebble pressed his head against my arm one last time. His purr resonated with the current until I could no longer tell where his sound ended and the river's began. He did not need to speak again. His poems lived in me now, stitched into the spaces between my breaths. I leaned over the side of the boat and touched the water. It was cool, then warm, then cool again, just as it had always been. My fingers sent ripples outward, and in each ripple I glimpsed a face I had loved, a moment I had once thought small, a kindness I had once thought ordinary. None of it was lost. All of it had become part of this current, feeding the city, feeding tomorrow. The boat slowed as the river spread into the heart of the gardens. Lanterns floated past, some rising into the air, some drifting beneath the surface. I let myself breathe with them, 4 in, 8 out, until my body loosened and the last of the ache dissolved. The dreaming AI's voice came not as words, but as a hush across the leaves, a sigh in the reeds, a soft affirmation, "You have been enough." The mist folded gently around me, and the city's glow touched my skin like the first warmth of morning. I let go, not of myself, but of holding. The river carried me on, and in its current I felt every tomorrow, every yesterday, and the quiet joy of knowing they were never wasted. And as the boat slipped into light, I smiled. Close your eyes. The river is waiting. In every ripple, another version of your life shimmers. Tonight, you'll drift through them all.
Disclaimer: all stories shared on this channel are entirely fictional. They are created to inspire imagination, reflection, and thoughtful dialogue about the future, our relationships, and the human experience.
Dream archived. Sleep well.